In this video, I want to take a look at what I think is the best version of discard that you can play in Lorcana. After testing a number of different variations of this deck, I do think that this one solves the problem that discard mostly has, and that is it allows you to deal with established boards even later on in the game, whereas other versions of discard aren't really able to do that. And we're going to take a look at some of the reasons why. Obviously, you play some very high cost characters that are able to do a lot of damage, like Tinkerbell, Cinderella, and Beast Tragic Hero. But you also play a number of control cards that help you stabilize the game early game. Things like Strength of the Raging Fire, Smash, Ring the Bell, and then of course you have your discard engine. So looking at this deck list, you do play 4 Bucky and 2 Chief Bogo, and these cards are really essential. Because Chief Bogo is not inkable, you probably only want to play 2 because the other non-inkables in this deck are very important. And your discard engine is basically just Lucifer, but one of the key cards that ties this whole deck together and makes it really, really strong is Bippity Boppity Boo. This card is really exploited to its maximum potential right now in this deck, I believe. And some of the combinations of things you can do with this card are, for example, you can drop a Lucifer on turn 5, and then sing Bippity Boppity Boo, bounce a Lucifer back to hand, and then just recast it. So right there, you've made your opponent discard up to 4 cards, or 2 actions, or an action and 2 cards. So it's very strong to just rip the opponent's hand apart. If you Bippity Boppity Boo while the Chief Bogo is on the field, let's say you drop a Tinkerbell, you sing Bippity Boppity Boo with Chief Bogo, you bounce Tinkerbell back to hand, remember you just played it this turn and then you just recast it, you are dealing 4 damage to everything on the board. You're dealing 2 damage to everything with Chief Bogo, and then 2 damage to everything with 2 drops of Tinkerbell. It is really strong. Not only that, you can also shift all of these targets, like, well, not all, but the Tinkerbell and the Cinderella, and then when you bounce them back with Bippity Boppity Boo, you get the underling card back to your hand that you can then use as ink. So there's a lot of like interesting resource management that you can do with this deck, and in combination with the 16 Floodborns that you play, all of which have really strong effects in and of themselves. We know how good Tinkerbell is, but all 3 new ones from Rise of the Floodborn, the Jafar Dreadnought, the Beast Tragic Hero, and the Cinderella Stout-Hearted, all are very strong cards in and of themselves that can help you manage the game at different points of the curve that you play on. Not only that, of course, you're also playing Prince John. You can only play 3 if you really wanted to, because you don't really want to brick on this card, and you shouldn't need to see this because, believe it or not, like the Jafar Dreadnought actually draws you cards and it's pretty useful. But also you have the Beast Tragic Hero. So you can just see how this deck is able to solve some of the problems, like being able to draw cards, dealing with big threats because you play big characters as well. Not only that, you have things like Smash and Ring the Bell that can help out cards, but utilizing Bippity Boppity Boo and Lucifer for control, utilizing the Bucky and the Chief Bogo for additional control when you play the Floodborns, which again you play 16 of. And then you just have some general utility cards, like I said, the Cinderella and the Tinkerbell on the smaller side or shift targets, but the Benja will help you deal with items to a certain degree if you run into those kind of decks, like let's say Steel Song Flute. And just overall, it's a pretty effective deck and a strategy that most people will be caught off guard by if they're not prepared for it. And even if they are prepared for it, they likely aren't able to do too much to play around it. In certain instances, if your opponent, let's say, dumps their whole hand because they see you're on discard and you have a couple of Lucifers in your hand, you can always Cinderella them or Tinkerbell them away, the smaller ones obviously, and then just play on with your big characters to win the game and just control the board that way. So now that you've seen the deck list and we've talked a little bit about the concepts, let's go ahead and put it into action and see how the deck performs. So usually with this deck, I like to put back the uninkables and the high costing characters unless I have the shift targets in hand. And I want to try my best to play on curve because you have to be aware of exactly what you see on screen here in aggro. If you do face up against an aggro deck, it can spell trouble for you if you don't have the necessary cards to slow them down until you get your Chief Bogo and or Tinkerbell setup going, where you can then start picking off damage on these things and stop them from questing for huge amounts. So we're a little bit behind right now, but we are going to be able to drop this Cinderella, and this single Cinderella will actually do enough to slow the opponent down. I end up discarding the Bippity Boppity Boo there because, again, I'm like, well, this card is not really going to have that much utility because the odds I'm going to be able to discard 4 off of a Lucifer is pretty slim, and just playing Lucifer once to discard whatever the opponent has in their hand should be good enough. And the Hypnotize that I drew is good because it's ink, and it will allow me to continue playing on curve. So that was the thinking there. It may not have been correct, but in the end, we end up drawing another Bippity Boppity Boo, so it doesn't really matter. The nice thing too about these aggro decks, when they see that you're playing Steel, they usually play very afraid because they are always aware of like the Tinkerbell drop, the Let the Storm Rage on, the Grab Your Swords, etc. And so you're gonna see some odd decisions by my opponent here, and they're actually the correct decisions in my opinion. Like they bounce back their Lilo and they don't recast it because they don't want it to get Let the Storm Rage on, because I could sing that with Prince John being a 3-cost character. So I'm taking advantage of the passiver play. Like the opponent is really trying to maintain their resources because as an aggro player, they probably know, well, if he's playing Prince John, he's on discard. He's going to try to discard my hand, but he's also on steal, so he's going to ping my cards on the board. And I just want to make sure I have enough resources to play around those cards. And you can see that they're doing a pretty damn good job. Turn 5, they already have 15 lore. But sure enough, this Lucifer is going to put in work, and that exact interaction I talked about during the decklist portion is going to happen right now. The opponent ends up discarding 1 card. It was an action part of your world, which makes sense to get back some of your aggro threats. We're going to go ahead and Jafar Dreadnought away the Arthur. Then we're going to sing Bippity Boppity Boo with the Prince John and just recast the Lucifer. This will force the opponent to discard 2 now because they have no more actions. So off of this interaction, we drew 3 cards off Prince John and made the opponent discard 2. Now they are an aggro deck, so they can easily close out the game as long as they draw like a Pinocchio or another high questing card that's low cost, or at this point it doesn't even need to be low cost because they're on 5 ink. They kept their Lilo and they opt to play a Pinocchio that they drew, which is pretty good. Thankfully, we have the Strength of a Raging Fire, which is able to take out the Pinocchio. This will only allow the opponent to go to 17 instead of going for game. And we opt to drop Beast Tragic Hero because we could use the card draw to hopefully draw into a Tinkerbell. But the Cinderella is not going to put in much work. That's why we ink it. Sure enough, the Beast Tragic Hero comes in clutch, and we do indeed draw the Tinkerbell. The opponent draws a card that they don't play, which is not great because, hey, I'm on discard. I'm going to likely make you discard that. So we go ahead and we ink the Jafar. And I'm going to opt to not play Chief Bogo here, but instead play Bucky and Jafar to make my opponent discard the card that they drew and also draw a card off of my Prince John. And we go ahead and we draw a Cinderella there. The opponent draws and drops a Pinocchio, but at this point, there's nothing the opponent can do. We have stopped the aggro. We drop a Tinkerbell, takes care of the Pinocchio. We also have a Smash and a Ring the Bell for whatever the opponent might have next, but it doesn't even matter because we are going for a game. We give them the well played. Let's move on to match number 2. So this deck being able to win going second against aggro should really say something, and you may say, well, the opponent kind of played not the best, but no, I think they actually played correctly, trying to play around Let the Storm Rage on and Grab Your Swords and so on. So they never bothered overcommitting to their board, but obviously being on a discard deck, it's like you put your aggro threats on field, they're going to get outed with the steel cards. You keep them in hand, they're going to get outed by the discard cards of Emerald. In this matchup though, you're going to see why I think the Floodborn version of this discard deck is superior, because we're in a bit of a mirror match here, and you can see that the opponent is playing pretty well on curve, but I wouldn't likely not play Hook going first right away until I know what my opponent is on, because this card might be more useful as ink. And knowing that, I know the opponent with the Tinkerbell might want to draw and discard, and sure enough they do. So that's why we play John on turn 3, and not like the Bucky, I think, which we had in hand. And it pays off because we're able to draw off Prince John as the opponent tries to fish for resources. But we're in pretty much total control here. The Bucky and the Prince John are going to trigger off of this Jafar Dreadnought dropping down. And again, was the 3 lore off the hook really worth it? Probably not. They do have a Hypnotize, and they're going to be able to draw 2 off of this. But you lose tempo for the turn when you play it, and so Hypnotize is not really a card you usually want to play through. It's usually just ink. They're going to draw and discard again with Tinkerbell, which will trigger my John, and at this point I'm just way too far ahead. And if you didn't catch it, I think they ended up drawing a Tinkerbell, a big Tinkerbell, and then discarding something else on the first iteration of their Tinkerbell tap and draw, and I made them discard it with my Jafar Dreadnought when I played it. So they weren't able to shift their Tinkerbell and deal with my Bucky or my other threats. Now on turn 5, I'm going to go ahead and drop the Lucifer, and it just devastates the opponent here. Now the Bucky has done its job. We're going to crash it to take out the opponent's Tinkerbell so that they can't top deck a big Tink. We're going to Jafar Dreadnought, take out something. We have 8 cards in hand. The opponent has 1. They've got nothing to do. yeah, it's just GG's. The Flynn Rider does nothing here. The Lucifer also discarded double Beast Tragic Hero, which was their draw engine. And then, you know, yeah, there's no point in keeping cards in hand because I'm going to discard them, obviously. They end up trading off the hook. And at this point, you know, we're just fishing for damage cards. We could drop the big Tinkerbell, which is exactly what we do. Take out their Bucky, deal damage to their John. And at this point, a Bippity Boppity Boo or a Chief Bogo would just wrap up the game. Yeah, the opponent can't do anything and they just end up scooping it up. If you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you want to see more gameplay. Thank you again. Quantum is out.